How's it going, everyone? I'm Dougie DeLuca, partner at Figment Capital, and today we're going to be talking about alt-VMs. To get started here, can we just go around, do a round of intros, who you are, what's your built in, and a brief description of what your protocol does?
All right, hi, my name is Rami. I work at RISC-0. We built a ZK VM based on the RISC-V architecture.
Hi, Steve Pack, head of product at Avail Labs. We incubated the Miden protocol, and most recently, and maybe more relevant for this panel, I'm also working on a ZK VM to add validity proofs to the OP stack.
I'm Rushi from Movement Labs, bringing the Move VM to Ethereum and alternative DA layers like Avail.
I'm Dominik, and we think the future is client-side proving, and that's why we have the Miden VM.
Hey guys, I'm David Mihal. I'm the senior architect at Fuel Labs, and we're building a new virtual machine, new language, whole new operating system for Ethereum rollups.
Awesome, cool. So I think to get started here, it's really important to talk about the why of why do we need alt-VMs when today we have 75%-ish of TVL on the EVM. And so I guess the first question I'm curious to ask is looking today at the landscape of EVM and how much market dominance it has, a year from today, where do you think the EVM sits? Is it still a completely dominant force? Is it less dominant but still there? This is a question for anyone really. A year from now, where do you see the VM landscape and the EVM's place in it?
I can kick it off. I think the EVM becomes legacy code in the Web 2, where the standards and principles and network effects can still exist, and the existing solutions that actually scale provide backwards compatibility. But with any new tech product or any new innovation, there's always a frontier to push. So we saw the intrusion programming where you had C, C++, even assembly at early stages. You saw legacy code adaptations for future versions like JavaScript, Python, etc. But ultimately, you had frameworks like React, Vue that kind of took the mantle to be the easiest way to build a website. So long story short, is Solidity and the EVM will still have legacy effects for the next few years. But we're seeing modern day virtual machines where it's Fuel, Movement, alternative VMs as well as re-parallelization or verification. So the right balance is pushing the boundaries of execution environments while providing solvency for the existing legacy code that exists.
I think it will be still very dominant, especially in a year from now. And we've seen many other VMs as well, in alternative layer ones. They had pretty smart ideas, but they all were just eaten up by Ethereum and the EVM, and they have by 10x more developers and tooling, and so it's very hard. It will be hard to flip them. So.
Yeah, I think the reality is today, if you're building a blockchain application, if you can build it on the EVM, you should probably build it on the EVM. It's where all the capital, all the liquidity is. It's where all the developer resources are. But I think the cool thing in the space of alternative VMs is you start to push the boundaries of what is possible. You start to be able to build applications that need more scale, more privacy, or more interoperability, other types of attributes that the EVM just can't provide. And I think it'll be it's kind of a cold start problem. It's tough to get people to start seeing those. But as VMs start to take off, people start to see oh, here's something I couldn't build on the EVM. They'll start to build it there. We've already seen that with Solana kind of reaching escape velocity, that people are going, okay, there's some things that you just need Solana level scale to build. You can't build that on the EVM. And that more people explore that on more VMs, there'll be more ideas, and people will want to oh, I have to build on Fuel, or I have to build on one of these other great projects because I just can't build it in Ethereum.
Yeah, I'd add to I like the Web 2 legacy thing. It's in a year, hard to bet against, the TVL of Ethereum. But, I think we all want to change the world in some way here, right? And, some of the things that have stood in the way of that, one is the onboarding UX, and there's been a lot of work in there, but another one's privacy, right? We still dox ourselves every time we transact on an Ethereum public blockchain. That's not the way it should be, and there's some big launches coming this year, Mina ZK apps, Aleo, some other privacy-focused chains, and I think, as adding those new features that just aren't possible in the EVM, that's where we're going to start to eat into that 75% number.
Yeah, 1 year is, I think, a short time for the EVM to go anywhere. And the major reason it's still here is because of the TVL and Ethereum itself. The Ethereum chain is why we still have to deal with the EVM, not to hate on the EVM. Anyway, but today we see developers doing some crazy things for which EVM or Solidity is just not really that suitable. It introduces a lot of friction. So longer term, maybe after more than 12 months, you could see less reliance on the EVM. I mean, Ethereum phased out proof of work. Who's to say you couldn't phase out the EVM itself, or just adopt something with that's more standard?
So nobody's calling for the death of the EVM.
I'm calling for it. I think everyone's like the EVM won, and my answer is won what? There's 1,000 developers in Web3, and you got 800 in Solidity. Congrats, right? If you look at early Web2, Assembly won in the early stages, C won in early stages, but now JavaScript is where all the developers are. So we're in the exact same inflection point where the older infrastructure, Bitcoin script, is the early developers, but it's still, we're all here not for 1,000 developers, we're here for 1 million developers. So in that world, it's not going to be a language that's clearly broken and clearly slow. It's going to be the further iterations upon that. So the EVM hasn't won because there's only 5 developers in crypto today. When we have 1,000 developers in crypto today that's actually active and pushing real code, then you're not going to see the EVM win. So yeah, in a year, it's not EVM still got mind share, but give it 10 years, the EVM is going to burn.
But why not just optimize the EVM?
Well, then it's not the EVM anymore. Miden specifically calls it the Miden version machine too. What they did is completely destructed the EVM and completely modified it to the point where it's not an EVM anymore. It still has backwards compatibility for existing Solidity language, which is completely different than the Ethereum virtual machine.
Yeah, and I think the Ethereum community should optimize the EVM, right? And they are, and they should optimize the hell out of it. But the design space is rich, right? There's other ways. We'll probably talk more about them, but just speak from me now. Client-side proving, right? Why are we even executing every transaction 500,000 times on every single validator? We don't need to do that anymore. There are better ways to do that. And so, Ethereum should continue doing it, but there's a lot more innovation to be had in the space.
I think there's I think it's super hard. There are certain points that the EVM and Ethereum can improve, but things like client-side proving or privacy will be super hard on an EVM chain. They would need to change a lot to make this happen, and then
I think the biggest example, if you look at recent EIPs, for solving registry, there's a few EIPs pushed by the Ethereum Foundation, and all of those would basically require complete modification of EVM to the point where existing legacy code doesn't matter. So even the Ethereum Foundation realizes that if they want to accelerate the EVM, they have to completely rewrite it, which is what other groups like Miden are doing and what alt-VMs like Move and Fuel are doing. But you can't expect the existing EVM, which is the Ethereum's EVM, to scale as rapidly as third-party EVM or alt-VM improvements. I think what's going to happen in the next 10 years, you're going to see EVM compatibility, but you're going to see acceleration 10x for alt-TMs. They're going to make it basically the EVM abstracted away. For example, some JavaScript programs still have C compatibility and assembly compatibility under the hood, but it's just a JavaScript program. So that's going to happen. We're going to have a next-gen VM with EVM traits.
But just to play devil's advocate, people have been hating on JavaScript forever. It's never been a great language, but and now most browsers, they have WASM support. Theoretically, you could you can write in C, you could build all sorts of frameworks with other languages, but JavaScript is still so the dominant language for web development. So wouldn't the same thing have happened there? How can we improve JavaScript instead of building on top of the
Well, it's people hate writing Rust, but people like writing in Anchor, in Fuel, and Move-based languages. So JavaScript is still a framework that people hate. It's very rudimentary, but then you had React and Vue on top of that, made building websites a lot more easier. And all the website builders in Web2 today write React and Vue. No one writes their JavaScript.
There's also just the ecosystem, right? 20 years of libraries, tooling, improvements on JS, and so there's a thing here too where you can split them, right? You can embrace literally JavaScript. We do. That's how we write smart contracts, because 20 million developers, right? But that's kind of different to what's the VM? It's a sort of a parallel question, I think.
I think the biggest point was 20 years there. We're talking about 1 year. Now, EVM's gonna stay here for a year, but give it 20 years, it's gonna burn.
EVM's it's 10 years old.
EVM is not a programming language. There's a lot of conflation there. You can't compile a lot of things down to EVM bytecode. And even if you try to really do that, you're going to be missing a lot of the interfaces that the language actually provides you with. So you're going to miss out on the actual power of the language that you're trying to use. I don't think it's that suitable for what people are trying to do right now.
So I guess a quick follow-up on that point is, do you think we're going to see certain languages, certain VMs be applied best for certain use cases, or is it going to be more generalized, where we see a few different VMs like really emerge as dominant? Or do you think it's be niche based?
I mean, to me, the VM is just one component to the really large system, right? It depends on how you want to scale your chain or what your plans are for execution in general. And, for example, if you care about parallel execution or parallel verification or any of these things, you might have a chain that is very different from Ethereum, something that has more pipelining of transactions built in, where transaction latency is a bit high, but TPS is a bit high, but TPS is also much higher than what we support now. So, I mean, EVM is just, I think, a consequence. We're moving away from the EVM is just a consequence of trying to move towards something more scalable.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. Like there are parallels in Web 2, right? For that, like people are still writing microcontrollers in C because it's well suited for that. Whereas 20 million people are writing JavaScript. Probably another 20 million or more are writing Java. And then more directly to the VM, like Intel, AMD have done very well over a long period of time, and now we have NVIDIA. Like, why? Like, because generalized workloads were the thing for a long time, and then there's always been this room for sort of specific, optimizations, and not the optimization that's just, can I make this opcode better, but like fundamentally, like hard engineering that optimizes for a certain thing. So I think it's just from IT in general, like it's fair to assume that there'll be both general purpose and niche, both VMs and languages.
So Rushi, I'm curious to hear your thought on this question. So Movement supports both MoveVM and EVM. Do you think a chain is best suited supporting just a single VM and like kind of fully optimized around that VM, or supporting multiple different VMs?
Well, I think like in traditional tech, you just have a new language, you try to propagate that. But what happens in crypto is you have like tribalism and you do have like the network effects. So I think the way we approach it is in the short term, we're talking the 1 to 3 year lens. The EVM, like obviously still going to be the EVM. The top blue chip protocols are not going to really deviate from the EVM. So that's why we have to provide cold start solvency, get liquidity on chain, get people using on chain. Otherwise, it's going to die within 12 to 24 months, right? But the 4 to 5 year bet is Facebook, the biggest consumer app in the world, literally looked at blockchains and was like, the EVM is hot garbage. Solana is good, but not good enough. Let's build a custom VM from scratch to power the billion users of Facebook. So they built a whole different programming language, and what we're doing is bringing it to Ethereum. So a simple thesis is, we believe in EVM compatibility. We don't believe in solidity. We think solidity long-term isn't going to scale, but the EVM itself still has value prop because Aave is on it, Uniswap's on it, the blue chip protocols we all use are still on that. But in a 10-year horizon, we're not looking to optimize Aave. We're looking to bring consumer apps and things that my mom, your mom, Dougie's mom all use, and that's probably not going to be an EVM.
I think it's an interesting question of like how do you get adoption from traditional apps coming over, and like how much do you want to hold their hand? Like putting an EVM on a new chain like makes it they can just kind of click deploy, and there's a whole spectrum on the other end is like they have to rewrite everything in your language. For us, we decided like we considered, okay, do we want to add EVM support to us? And we're like, well, you're not going to get the best features of the Fuel VM and the Fuel stack if we're like emulating the VM on top, if we're adding all this extra tech stack. So we went for, okay, we're going to build tools to convert like Solidity into Sway, our programming language. So we figured like, okay, like we'll hold their hand a bit to come over and learn it, but still we figure if they'll rewrite it into Sway, we can compile it with the Sway compiler, have it be Fuel bytecode, you'll be able to fully maximize the VM. I don't know, do you think there's like trade-offs when you're putting like the EVM in a more high-performance chain when it still has to be like kind of single-threaded and things like that?
Well, I think when you're a developer, you're writing Solidity, like you're coming from like the Ethereum background, you'll write Solidity off the bat because it's easier, and you'll be like, holy shit, it's like so much faster, more secure to use a new language. So then you get the actual like performance gain. For example, we've seen like Cosmos and EVM apps who have never touched Move in the past 3 to 6 months, now running from scratch Move code because they tried the Solidity piece, was like, this is good, but I want higher throughput, I want static dispatches, how you prevent against race fee. They see the features and then they migrate over it, and they wouldn't have touched it if it was just a monolithic layer 1 that was like, use my tech or screw up.
So Rami, how do you view this in the context of like RISC 0? Because like you guys definitely sit in a slightly different position versus like some of the teams up here. How do you view like kind of this question that I was asking?
Yeah, so the thing is, you might want to ask yourself if anyone's ever going to build hardware based on the EVM. No one's going to build a chip that actually is EVM native because there are a lot of very specific choices made inside that. So it means that the EVM is never really going to benefit from the really large tools out there that are made for all the other instruction sets. And as a consequence for RISC-0, because we rely on the RISC-V architecture, we get to leverage a lot of that. So does all labs when they rely on the MIPS architecture. And that means as a developer, not just the app developer, and developer at maybe lower level things, you have a lot more power or a lot more tools to use when you use something that is standard out there and something that is also extensible. So, for Ethereum, if you take out the EVM, the transaction execution, all you're left with is basically, in consensus side, is the Merkle-Patricia trie, just for storage. So it's essentially just a giant storage engine without the EVM. And a lot of these instruction sets are actually quite extensible, where you could replace some of the, like you can add in an extension that behaves like sload or S, or when you want to try to update the Patricia trie. So yeah, when you go to things that are more standard and extensible, you get to leverage a lot of what's already out there.
Gotcha. Awesome. Cool. So I think to recap kind of what's been said here, the EVM sounds like it's going to be going away. Maybe the 1 year time horizon was too short, but on a longer term time horizon, it sounds like we're probably going to move towards alt-VM kind of landscape where we have seems like different VMs for different use cases, but some disagreement there. But the next part I'm pretty curious about talking about is obviously Avail. A lot of teams here are building the modular space. We've seen alt-VMs like Solana be applied as their own L1. We've seen some teams up here applying it to L2s. This is for anyone to jump in and answer, and definitely would like to dive into this deeper. But do we think that implementing alt-VM is best on an L1, where you kind of control the whole stack, or on an L2, where you do sacrifice some control, but ultimately still have your own roll-up, your own L2, if you want to put it?
I mean, I think if you're modular, it shouldn't matter from an engineering perspective, right? You want to build a stack that can be running on Ethereum DA, can be running on Celestia, Avail, like any DA layer can settle on Ethereum, can settle on another settlement layer. Like, focus on like the part that you want to make really good and just make sure it can work everywhere.
I think your problem, like from a product perspective, it doesn't make sense to build your own layer 1, because then you also have to care about security, which is what you outsource as a layer 2. And caring about security is a whole different ballgame than creating a VM. And you need some kind of validators or proof of work, and then you need to pay them somehow. And so it's pretty complicated. And so definitely Dell 2.
I don't want to let this get out of hand, but counter to that is why not just use Eigenlayer for security?
How secure Eigenlayer would be, or
why not use some shared security solution to kind of abstract that issue, like being your own L1?
But if you have an L1, could you use Eigenlayer for consensus then, or?
There's stuff happening that will allow that.
You could build it.
Not today, but
then it would not. Yeah. So okay, but then it depends on how you define an L1.
But that's where it gets messy. That's why I was like, I probably shouldn't ask that question.
It's like Ethereum security or not Ethereum security. Right?
But the question is can you pay for security only as fees to Ethereum, or do you need to come up with a system to secure your chain, and somehow you need to pay for it? And so the question is, what do you want to do product-wise?
No, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes sense, right? That's just a software maxim from a long time, and something like DA, if you're not investing in that as part of your core mission in your blockchain, why are you spending time on it? For us, for example, in the MENA world, it's privacy, make it easy to write apps using TypeScript and JavaScript. Are we going to invest in a DA? No, they're a mint, right? And similarly, with my other hat on, the validity proofs work for OP. The only reason that's possible is because Optimism done a lot of work to split out the stack to be an OP stack and actually have these things modular. So, it would have been very difficult to do if they hadn't done a lot of thinking up front about where the interfaces are. And just as someone who's been in software a long time, this one is, I don't know if you guys have found this, in crypto, it's not always so obvious. You kind of want to just draw a line and say, here are the interfaces of my system. And then you get into these deep cryptographic sort of details, or it's like decisions you make up here can actually make have impacts much further down. So for something like as encapsulated as DA, I think of course make it modular, but dragons be there when you try and make everything modular.
I mean, how many L1s are people using today? I think it's the easiest answer. I think it's very difficult to bootstrap liquidity for alt-VM L1 because you have a completely different wallet system, completely different user experience. There's maybe like 2 or 3 live L1s that people actually talk about, care. They're all VMs. I think with the modern stack monothesis, you can come to Ethereum. The easiest way is like if you look at operating systems. If I was building operating systems and made people launch new hardware requirements, down a new computer, no one's probably using my operating system. But if you use my operating system on top of Windows or like a traditional PC, there's a bigger and higher escape velocity for that VM, which is why we're seeing like SVM, MoveVM, FuelVM really come to Ethereum because you can leverage Ethereum security, still be on like Ethereum liquidity, you have native ETH on chain, or using native BTC protocols come out now. Use the liquidity to bootstrap a different operating system in this case, which I think is the best way to jumpstart adoption. Otherwise, you need like $300 million to bring L1 to market.
Yeah, I think that plays into what Dominik was saying. Is like an L1 is expensive. You need to pay a lot for security. Maybe you're not paying it out of pocket; you're paying it with issuance, but that just means you might have an unsustainable token model, and only like the biggest chains are going to be able to be L1s. And I think what's going to be really interesting is like today it's like you either kind of like launch as an L1 or launch as a rollup, and we've actually seen some like L1s turning into rollups, probably because of the economics. But in the future, we're going to see more projects go the other way, kind of going like the DYDX model, where you're like, okay, launch as a rollup, like prove yourself out there when you're not paying for security. And then maybe you want the sovereignty that you say, okay, I'm going to like spin off and like split away from Ethereum, be my own L1.
I think that comes to questions, do like these big protocols want to pay rent to Ethereum? And I've heard back and forth answers, so it's kind of an open question. It's like, if I'm GMX or if I'm Avail, should I be launching a layer 1 and have my own custom environment now that I already have top user base, or do I continue to pay rent to Ethereum? My argument is that the rent to Ethereum is pretty getting like minimally low when you have alt-DA, you have pro-ding, sharding, so that rent to Ethereum becomes next to nothing. So I think those layer 2 app chains become much bigger thesis, which is why like Hyperliquid, which is like layer 1 cryptics, if they launch as like an arbitral rollup, it'd be pretty expensive for them. But yeah.
So I'm curious here because David and Rushi, slightly different perspectives actually, where David's arguing that as a L2 gets bigger, it has incentive to become its own L1 to gain that sovereignty, have more control of the stack. And Rushi, you're arguing the opposite. Do we think that L2s are just on a path to becoming L1s, whether it's like a Cosmos chain like DYDX or something else? Or do we think that despite how big an L2 might get, they'll always remain an L2 and choose to pay rent, however much that might be, to Ethereum?
I think that also depends on how many users you have. But because even with product sharding, for example, Ethereum will be pretty limited. Like you can have 1,000 TPS maybe on all rollups together, like in a real ZK or like rollup way. But if you have like, I don't know, you have an exchange that has 1,000 TPS alone, then you have no choice than going to a Millennium or creating your L1. But if you have users like the normal crypto application, which is like 10 users a day or so, then it doesn't make sense. Like, yeah.
The next question is Avail, which is on Celestia, which is a rollup, or DYDX, which is a Cosmos app chain. Both are doing well in their own environments. I think it's developer choice, and ultimately probably economic incentives as well. But they both have minimal gas fees, next to nothing gas fees. The Cosmos ZK enables DYDX to do some cool stuff with consensus models, and the DYDX code base I've heard is like the most complex code base in history, which you probably can't do on layer 2, while Avail is more focused on user experience and kind of like going quickly to market and kind of taking the Pertex market to Storm. So I think speed is probably, if you want to get to market quickest, is probably easiest to do to the layer 2. If you want an extreme customization to the point where DYDX, where it's literally like atomic code, you probably need to make your own layer 1.
And probably it also depends which expertise you have in-house, like if you're a small app.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at like the different factors that would influence this decision. We've talked about cost a lot. Like obviously, like today Ethereum's expensive. I mean, it's going to get cheaper, but it'll always have probably some premium. Sovereignty is a big one. That's if you look at like the MakerDAO like kind of proposal to spin off like MakerDAO as an L1. That was all about sovereignty. With DYDX, I don't know if we ever got like the full like story of why DYDX spin off, but my thought was like a lot of it might be legal. That especially at that time, like I think today there's still no shared sequencer roll up, so you might have some legal liabilities being a roll-up with like centralized components, but of course that will change. So, it's always going to be a business decision, like cost, sovereignty, privacy might be one, things like that, that teams will just kind of evaluate, but those things will change over the course of a chain's lifetime.
I'd add security to that, because I guess, Ethereum is like premium security, right? That's the one we trust more than others. And so if you've got a general purpose L2 doing a variety of things, and some of those are high security, it's going to be a hard sell to your users to go to a cheaper version. If you've got something has less security requirements, but you can get way cheaper gas, much higher throughput, then the trade-off changes. And I think that's kind of why the app chain or the sovereign roll-ups, they make sense to me, but one by one, right? It depends on what your requirements are.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are happy to pay rent to Ethereum for these things, and I think the Ethereum Foundation is recognizing that and is moving to more in support of that.
I think that might change though, user-wise. Today, crypto is very ideological, right? Everyone, when you use an app, what chain you're on, you might pick which apps you'll use based on chains. I don't want to use I think most people here are like, I'm not going to use an app on Tron. I don't trust that chain. But if we're really able to abstract away apps from the underlying infrastructure, chains, DAs, things like that, and get the cost down, users aren't going to care what's running underneath. I think who will care will be there'll be some users, larger users, institutions. If you're a bank, you're probably going to want to use a very secure decentralized chain. And then if you're a developer, that's a big consideration. If you're building on a chain, then you'll really care, am I building on it? Am I tying myself to some infrastructure that's going to be a problem? Is there a liability with using this piece of infrastructure?
So that's the perfect transition to what I want to talk about for the last major topic, which actually is applied to VMs, but fragmentation. I think the biggest criticism of the whole alt-VM narrative is fragmentation. Why EVM maximalists are arguing that we should optimize EVM is because you're fragmenting the developer base, tooling, etc. Rushi, you were saying that you think it's stupid because we have 1,000 developers right now, and so why do we care about fragmentation when the pie should hopefully grow exponentially larger and presumably new developers eliminate the fragmentation of the existing developer base issue? This is a question I would love to hear everyone's perspective on, but is fragmentation a real issue? Should we actually be talking about it, or is it a bunch of noise that in the long-term time horizon just doesn't really matter?
I think because there's 10 TPS of every major chain, fragmentation is an issue today. I think what's going to happen, I think Santiago also put this pretty well, it's you're going to have this unraveling where you're going to have this 1,000 blockchains is going to come in thesis, but then the product market fit is not going to exist for 99% of these blockchains. So it's going to consolidate to 4 major chains that have clear custom use cases, have the best performance possible, and are very good enough for today's market. I think that's happening within the next 5 years. Fragmentation isn't an issue, just it's really annoying to use wormhole layer 0 sometimes to bridge my assets, but really we should be accelerating alt-VM adoption, because EVM, if you just focus on EVM adoption, you're going to wait 30 years before you get parallel execution fixed, or wait until you get formal verification embedded. These kind of fixes are only possible to alt-VM kind of acceleration, and then tying it back to how can you rope in people from other ecosystems.
I think interop I think is the problem in blockchains right now. We're approaching, we're not there, but we're approaching the end period of scalability. Scalability, I don't know when we'd say it started, but there was the CryptoKitty moment in 2017, right? When everyone's oh crap, we have all these big ideas, and Ethereum just went down because one game was moderately popular. And then fast forward to today, and it's we've all the best people have been thinking about scalability. We've almost got that figured out, but that introduced all this fragmentation. And I'd say the fragmentation issue probably started or maybe the CryptoKitties moments was 2021. You have all these alt layer 1s, and then you had bridge hacks left and right. So I think we're starting to see the solutions with shared sequencing, shared DA layers, with kind of state proofs, just generalized ZK proving across different VMs. So we're still kind of in that middle stage there, but it's clearly a problem if you've used all these layer 2s. You're in these walled garden ecosystems. And in the future, it should be I shouldn't need to think about what chain I'm on. If I want to add funds to an app, it should just appear there. It'll all just kind of blur into the background.
Yeah, I think we all have to take it seriously, right? You can't pretend that fragmentation is not a thing. There's a lot of liquidity on Ethereum, right? So Miden is an L1. We have to solve that problem. And I think like most chains, we want to make sure we're in Ethereum's orbit, right? Like whether that's bridging, there's a lot of ways to do it. But I think you need ignore Ethereum at your risk. So be in the orbit, right? Definitely. But yeah, again, what we talked about earlier, this is a rich design space. The EVM is not locked and loaded for the next 30 years. There's a lot more to do. So whether it's developer productivity using languages you're familiar with, like we talked about, JavaScript and TypeScript. There's privacy, whatever it is, you need to have a compelling enough reason to be able to attract some of that liquidity to you. But that's our challenge. I think we're up for it.
I use two fragmentations. You have developer fragmentation, which I argue is good because that incentivizes new developers. You're not trying to get the same 5 developers to all do the same language over and over again. You want to get Web 2 audience. You want Silicon Valley to come in. You want the University of Zurich to come in. You want new audiences to pick up new languages. So I argue developer fragmentation is good. Blockchain fragmentation is bad, which is why you have shared sequencers, you have zero-knowledge bridging, you have trustless bridging, you have IBC, you have these fixes that are fixing the kind of compatibility issues. So there's 2 fragmentations I would argue.
There definitely is. And I think we touched on the user standpoint, but the developer standpoint, we've touched on enough, honestly, which is right now, the obvious, the trade-off is okay, I can go build on the EVM, I can sacrifice certain things, but I know that there's going to be a user base there, there's good tooling, whatever. And when you go to an alt-VM, maybe Rust is kind of or SVF gone past this point, but it's am I making a bet on a VM that's not going to exist in a few years? I think a lot of developers right now don't want to make that bet because of the long-term impacts of it. But do you guys think that's a good thing to have to choose between? Or it sounds like Rushi, you think to a degree it might be. But yeah, just curious to hear expanded thoughts on that.
I think the biggest thing is marketing conditions, pitching move post FTX was probably the most hardest thing I've done because everyone's it's either EVM or it's not going to matter. Every non-EVM is dead, Solana is dead, and as soon as Solana price action goes up and Sweet price action goes up, everyone's oh wow, next gen VMs are here. EVM's dead. So I think a big thing of that is that ultimately developers want to make a career out of life. They want to find a system, build an app that's going to be for 3-4 years. I think you have to achieve that to pushing towards a new language and pushing towards acceleration, but also providing compatibility. So if I'm a developer on a current chain and the language goes broke or the ecosystem, something happens with that, I can still bring my app in an EVM environment. So kind of Arbitrum is kind of the best. I think they have EVM++, where they have EVM compatibility, obviously, but now they have Rust, Solidity, TypeScript, enabling a bunch of different languages to deploy on top of Arbitrum.
And you want to be solving the major problems. There's always new problems that are appearing for developers, and the newer VMs will address those problems head on in ways that other VMs can't adapt to. So early VMs, when you get the EVM and stuff, you're running ERC20 contracts, and you've seen all these issues with implementing assets on the smart contract level. So Fuel, Move, Miden, they're all doing native assets now. That just gives you a ton of benefits. And we're going to see more and more, kind of issues that interoperability is a big issue now. So newer VMs, newer languages are going to need to provide interoperability as a key feature. They're going to want to provide, account abstraction is the big talk now. You can build account abstraction on the EVM with 4.337. It's kind of a mess. Newer VMs will give developers a much easier path to building account abstraction. So, that's kind of the boost that you get by being a new EVM is you can kind of just make developers' lives so much easier.
I also think that, in my experience, most developers, they are able to learn new things and they are able to, code something on StarkNet and then move on to, because they know Solidity, and then in the next job they're going to code in the Rust Fuel language. And so it's not that, sometimes we have this tribalism also in blockchain developers and think they are the Rust developers and the Solidity developers, but my experience, the experienced developers, they will be able to create a cool app in half a year on whatever language you give them, if it's not assembly or...
Yeah. I still think that we're trying to, we want millions, not 5 developers, and the language is part of that, right? Some developers, are language nuts and they're always looking for the latest thing. Others, it's what are the 10 different things I can build with my language and my tool set? And, that's why I think JavaScript, TypeScript's a good bet. Rust also a good bet. But in every layer you add on top of that, right, makes it harder for someone to be I choose you. I choose your ecosystem for your, for whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it might also, just one thing to add is that might close the circle to the VMs, because I think new VMs, they enable to build new language, like they enable you to build new applications rather than the languages. Like if you have a cool virtual machine and then a cool new protocol and you roll up, then you can build really cool new applications regardless of which language it will be. Or like parallel execution, like in whatever language it is at the end.
Like my general thesis, I like going back to Web 2. So you had JavaScript for building websites. You could build a website JavaScript, but then you had React, Vue, and Angular, which made building websites really easy, and they all had different use cases. I think Angular was better for gaming, and React, you can do a website in 10 minutes. The same things happen with Rust, which I think most people are kind of agreeing is kind of future programming, even in AI and other industries. So React is going to be Rust is to JavaScript, and you have frameworks on top of Rust. So you have Fuel, you have Move, you have Solana VM, you have other VMs coming, frameworks coming on top of that, that make specific use cases as easy as possible.
I disagree. JavaScript is JavaScript.
Okay.
Use that, and then but it's kind of true in that this is the tool for the job, right? So if you need Rust because you need to do type safe things or lower level or more foot gun checks, use Rust. But if you just want to be super productive, pick a general purpose super productive language, all the tooling, if we want to bring open the 10.
Okay, I'm going to push back on that. Name one JavaScript app in Web3.
Name the ones that are going to launch on Miden shortly.
Okay, I'm sure they're I can point to every Solana protocol, every Aptos protocol, Sweet protocol, Cosmos Wasm, every non-EVM protocol that's somewhat legit is Rust-based.
Yeah, because the JavaScript ones haven't launched. That's coming in hot.
Is what, Agoric, I think? It's JavaScript. Yeah, Cosmos. So they must have a few. But no, I'm definitely on Rushi's side of
name one app on JavaScript. Name one JavaScript Web3 app.
I minted a stable coin on Agoric. That must be good.
Next page. Okay, cool. Next page.
You need a stack that can support JavaScript, which there aren't many.
And I'm obviously talking my own book here, but what we are also talking about is how to widen the tent. Is it just EVM, or is there room for more? And I think part of there being room for more is languages that 20 million people can use.
But I think ultimately you're going to want we're not building mobile smartphone apps using with C, but websites and stuff like that. You wouldn't want to build a website in C. It's a different tool for a different job. And blockchains are completely a blockchain is a computer, but it's a completely different type of computer, completely different requirements. You have things every application is temporal in a blockchain. So you don't need to put as much focus on memory management, but storage is really expensive. So you're going to want to make different compromises to minimize storage. And so you can do all those things in JavaScript if you want, but if you have a language and a tool set that helps you do that, that's just going to be so much easier. That's why Solidity is the default language now. Solidity is an application-specific language for blockchains. It's just not a great one.
So I'm curious to hear your bull case of JavaScript, because David just said he hates JavaScript, and I hate JavaScript. So why do you think the JavaScript Web3 apps are the future?
Because there's 20 million developers out there writing apps every day for Web 2. We all acknowledge we want Web 2 data online. We want Web 2 developers. Sorry, I said online. In Web 3, we want Web 2 developers on Web 3. What better way to do it? One is make Web 2 data available, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on with CK oracles. The other one is let them use their language, let them use their tooling, let them use everything they're familiar with, to the point where your front end, React, JavaScript, Angular React, your smart contract, same thing, TypeScript. Sure, it gets submitted to a blockchain, and even Mina, the blockchain nodes aren't written in JavaScript; it's written in OCaml and Rust. But for actually developing applications, it's a great language.
I think the language is not the hard part. When we have developers coming into Fuel, plenty of developers, people like Fuel, but people run into problems. It's never been the language. The language, if you're a developer, you can learn a new language quickly. The thing is, they say is okay, there's not enough libraries. Solidity, there's a huge bunch of libraries for
JavaScript, huge amount of libraries.
Not for blockchains, not for
but for what specific thing, right? So any logic you want to express, there's 20 years worth. For the specific part that you need,
it's okay, I want to make an NFT, right? If I'm building an app in Solidity, I go get the Open Zeppelin NFT contract, right? And any, for Fuel, for Move, for any of these new languages, you're going to need to have an NFT standard. In JavaScript, it's okay, there's not you're familiar with JavaScript, but you're not familiar with whatever NFT standard will need to be created for JavaScript, right?
We have one.
but that's like a new thing. Like they're like a JavaScript developer doesn't know your NFT standard, right? It's still True. They will.
Yeah,
We're gonna bring them along.
This is the Vina bull case. It's a Vina show panel.
what about auditing as well? Like I think it would be kind of hard to get a confident audit on.
Yes, our auditors are more comfortable with the RISC components
Yeah.
auditing the JavaScript components, but
Let us do it. I'm gonna take a shot here. In the audience, who here has written in JavaScript for any Web 2 purposes? Who here has ever thought to use JavaScript for on-chain purposes?
yeah, one in the back.
I've got a few
He's the
people.
Miden user. He's the Miden user.
I think only time will tell. I personally heard the JavaScript pitch for years now, and thus far it doesn't seem like it's really come to fruition, but I do think the addressable developer base is there, and who knows, crazy shit could happen, but I'm skeptical personally. That'll be my stance. I think we have a few minutes left. Yeah, I think in the nature of today's kind of event, the hot take series, like to wrap this up, what's everyone's hottest take in terms of like alt-VM narrative, where it's heading? I think we just got into one with JavaScript, honestly, but anything else you guys think is...
I've got one that's a good follow-up there, is that everything we've just been saying about like JavaScript's maybe not right for blockchains applies to Rust as well.
Oh man.
Rust is a systems language, it's not a blockchain language.
Because we have frameworks that offer that.
There are. Just built this way.
I mean, blockchains are systems, right? You just need to have the right abstractions in between. So,
I got one. Maybe you might agree with this, Dominik. I don't know. Like why is the sort of VM such a focus? Like I still like proof of stake was a significant improvement over proof of work, but still we have 500,000 computers all executing the exact same code over and over again to come to consensus. There are better ways. Zero knowledge, right? Prove it client side. Like that's a bigger conversation.
Yeah, I also think like the biggest change in blockchains in the future will be client-side proving, because like this is the only way to reach scale blockchains, and like you prevent re-execution of all these things altogether. And most of the blockchains we see today are still following this very old concept, and like we have now efficient zero-knowledge proofs, and with that, like this is made for blockchains. It's like
yeah, but you have to change a lot of things if you want to make use of that, because even if you have like your block propagating with a nice zero-knowledge proof attached, block proposers still need to know the actual state updates behind that block to actually propose new blocks.
it depends. No, like,
You have to change the like for Ethereum it's not going to work, but if you have something called the
exactly for EVM
state updates attached.
Exactly. Yeah. But for Miden it works that you can some people can post their stuff to Avail, stuff to Eigenlayer, and then like I don't know, the block producer only knows the hashes or commitments of stuff, and you can still produce a block. Like, and this is it solves state problem. Yeah, it's possible. And like this actually solves lots of blockchain problems.
Yeah, it kind of flips over the model. You're talking more like a UTXO model rather than a
Both, yeah, like it's account and UTXO, like a hybrid of account and UTXO model.
like
Like,
execute an account, but you then publish the changes in the.
like it's both. Like it's a longer discussion, but you can solve that, and yeah, it definitely like it goes hand in hand with blockchains as clients are proving.
This is the alt-VM discussion.
Yeah.
It's like a opcode panel.
I was about to say, if anyone wants to have us for part 2, we didn't talk about ZK nearly enough in the role of this. Probably need to do like hours of homework before I feel comfortable asking questions in that regard, or you guys do it without me. But yeah, I mean, I think this has been an awesome conversation, guys. Like, really appreciate everyone coming up here and sharing their thoughts, and thanks to the audience for listening. This is where I'll end it.
Thanks for having us. Good fun.